Hello everyone, Dr. Chip here. Welcome to the third of 5 talks on stress. Talk 1, what is stress? Talk 2, what are the consequences of stress? And now, talk 3, managing stress. Talk 4 will be the source of stress. Talk 5, how to overcome stress. But for today, let's find out what there is out there to help us manage stress. Okay, this is a PowerPoint presentation. This will give you time to chew on it. You can stop it, go back later to finish the rest of it if it ever gets to the point where it's boring or you just can't digest that much. But I encourage you to eventually go through it all so that you'll understand and maybe see clearly what things manage stress and don't really overcome it. They just give a temporary feel good. And that's what today's talk is about, what the world offers to manage stress. Part of my 5-part series on stress, a better understanding. Remember from part 1 that stress is not what you think it is. Stress is your emotional reaction to what you believe is a threat. Stress is the monkey in the middle. As the caption says, the face of rage and terror. Stress is anger and fear. Stress is feeling. People can use the words impatience, I'm frustrated, I'm irritated, guilty feelings, buttons pushed, depression, but they just cover up what's really going on, which is stress underneath. Other words for fear are doubt, insecurity, anxiety, nervousness. I'm jumpy, I'm on edge, I'm tense. That's all. I have fear. Okay, remember from the second talk on the consequences of stress that we have this vagus nerve, which starts up about ear level in the lower brain and the reptilian brain. And it sends out impulses when there's no stress to say to everything's okay, to the body organs. The vagus nerve goes all the way to our gut, to all of our organs, to our lungs, to our heart, and also to our facial muscles. When everything is okay, there's no stress, we're relaxed, our facial muscles are relaxed, our organs are working well, we breathe slowly, our heart rate slows down, we digest well. And when the vagus nerve is not working properly under stress, things change. You might get just a headache or muscle tension, or you might eventually get cancer or heart disease. Irritable bowel syndrome. We also learned in talk 2 that there are 3 cascading responses from a threat. First a thought, then feeling, then behavior. Toward the end of that talk, I explained that anyone who can get you to feel angry or anytime anyone can get you to feel fear, they can control your behavior. So it's very important to overcome the stress. These talks are about understanding stress and eventually overcoming it. My goals for you for talk 3, which is today, are to learn how drugs, including sugar and caffeine, are a way that people manage stress. They're not the cause of the stress, and they're not the cause of addiction. Learn about new medical approaches to stress, such as a guided hallucinogen trip. Most people only need 1 trip, and we'll learn about that. Also understand how breathing exercises lower stress levels, although only temporarily. It's a way to manage, not overcome stress. And compare physical, mental, and religious approaches to managing stress. Physical approach will be the longest because there's just a lot of different things that people do physically to calm down. The psychological and the religious will be pretty short toward the end. Okay, let's get started. The world is in crisis. Every day, 22 veterans committing suicide. Suicide rates in children have skyrocketed. There's no real opiate crisis, as we'll find out. And the war on drugs is not the answer. What we have is a stress crisis. In 2016, Congress passed the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act. They said we need to start using complementary and integrative health. The VA decided, well, we need the whole health system of care so that we can do not just conventional medicine, but also some alternatives to combat stress. Antidepressants and tranquilizers alone, talking to people, let them lay it down on a couch or whatever, just isn't working. So let's try these other things. And so they defined the whole health approach as body, mind, and spirit. In the VA, veterans with PTSD or stress can utilize the mental health service, multi-million-dollar building at Bay Pines just for mental health. They spend a lot of money on the salaries for people like psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, occupational therapists. For those veterans that fail the mental health service, which according to the chief of the chaplain service, who's now retired, when I interviewed him, 88% of the veterans fail the mental health service, and they are offered the chaplain service as an alternative. So the physical management of stress, body approach. I remember mind, body, spirit. In general, conventional medicine treats symptoms, not the cause. What are the symptoms that psychiatrists are treating? Remember from Stress Talk 2, functional MRI, a person who is stressed is emotional. Their limbic system lights up on functional MRI. They're hypervigilant. They're looking around all the time to see if there's a threat. Their visual cortex is extra active. They have difficulty communicating. The speech center is deactivated. They need people to manage their daily life, get them to their doctor's appointments, make sure they take their medication. They have caretakers. The VA pays for 24/7 caretakers for many of the veterans with PTSD. And you could even be their wife. And because it's so difficult to take care of them, the VA will pay you so you don't have to go to work, so you can stay home and be a caretaker for your husband who was traumatized. Classic PTSD, non-functioning cerebral cortex on functional MRI. If we're not looking at functional MRI, is there any other way we can tell that people have stress? Well, what about workaholism, overeating, anorexia, substance abuse, exercise fanatics, people pleasers, people with high blood pressure, autoimmune disease, stomach cramps, IBS, headaches, asthma? These are all stress related. In fact, family doctors say that 90% of visits to a family doctor are for conditions that are stress related. Even more subtle symptoms of stress are your breathing rate. If you're relaxed, then check your breathing rate. How many times a minute do you breathe? And if it's more than 6 times a minute, you probably are stressed. And just slowing your breathing down is one of the ways of managing stress. Heart rate variability. If your heart rate doesn't speed up with inspiration and it doesn't slow down when you exhale by 5 or 10 beats, then you probably are chronically stressed. You can try a control pause. When you're relaxed, at the end of an exhale, you can hold your nose and close your mouth. And if it takes less than 20 seconds till you have to breathe, you probably have stress, even a disease. And if it's less than 40 seconds, not as severe, but still probably stress. You should be able to hold it 40 seconds or more if you're not under stress. So what is the goal of the physical approach? To live in the ventral vagal complex, the vagus nerve functioning well, sending out parasympathetic nervous impulses so you're calm, relaxed, all day, all night. Facial muscles relaxed, digestion going well, breathing rate slows down, heart rate slows down. Everything is just functioning well. So what is it that people have tried? The physical approach is more a bottom up. Do something to get us into the lower brain, the reptilian brain, and out of the prefrontal cortex where the thoughts are. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. Bernie Siegel, in his book, Love, Medicine, and Miracles, found out that not all of his pancreatic cancer patients were dying if they refused conventional medical treatment. That about 1% actually survived. In fact, the cancer went away with no radiation, no surgery, no chemotherapy. He started a support group where they could share their experience and help each other. So a support group is one of the things that is offered from conventional medicine. He was an MD. We know from Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps a Score, that social support is something that keeps the monkey calm. But when there's inadequate social support and there's a threat that can't be managed, then that's when the monkey will react with fear and anger. If there's no social support around, the fear and the anger come back. It doesn't fix the problem. That's why people that go to social support groups often go very often, call their sponsor very often. Remember that the human nature or natural way of dealing with stress when social support fails, if there's inadequate social support and the anger and the fear come back, that the response to the anger and the fear is either control or withdrawal. Fight or flight, thought, feeling, behavior. The behavior is fight or flight, just like the monkeys. So let's look at some recent science about control. It's amazing what's been discovered recently. In Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, what the new science of psychedelics teaches us about consciousness, dying, addiction, depression, and transcendence. An amazing book by an amazing author. What they discovered with functional MRI when they were investigating these psychedelics was that when people were stressed, they are in control mode. The parts of their brain in the very middle of the brain, prefrontal cortex, and on back to the visual cortex, were all highly functioning. So they thought when somebody took a hallucinogen, because it seemed to help some people, it was thought initially a hallucinogen would make the brain light up, that it would just go crazy. And that's what I thought it would do. Everybody talks about LSD causing trips. It just seems like the brain must be going haywire. What they found was striking. It was just the opposite. It turns out that these guided psilocybin trips done at Johns Hopkins and at Berkeley to treat depression and fear of death in terminal cancer patients found that on functional MRI, that instead of the brain going haywire, these hallucinogens actually shut down the default mode network. So the person for the first time is unable to control their experience. They can't make the world look the way they want it to look anymore. They can't control other people. They have to let go of control completely. It's a physical response to a hallucinogen. It's not a psychological or spiritual response of letting go. It's actually a physical let go, and they have to. It's chemical. This has to be done with a guide. Don't do this on your own, or you may have a bad trip. A guide should be there who's experienced, who knows how to keep you calm, so that when you go on a rocket ship, say, and you think you're flying into outer space and you really think you're flying out there, you won't freak out, that you'll stay calm and just go through it. Theoretical physicists say that these guided hallucinogen trips, for the first time, the person is seeing reality as it is, that they were experiencing an illusion before, an illusion created by their mind, which is fascinating to me. So this is not just research anymore. Now we're in phase 4 at the Portland, Oregon VA, which is actually treating people so they can find out if this works long-term or if these hallucinogens cause some long-term side effects. But it's being used to treat people. What about withdrawal? Withdrawal, whether it's depression or other things that we'll look at, is running away from the problem. It's avoidance and distractions. There can be many different manifestations of avoidance: laziness, underachievement, video games, drugs, alcohol, carbohydrates, sugar, caffeine, exercise, sex, television, movies, sports team, new car, temporary feel betters. But in the long term, you got to go back to the drug because it doesn't overcome the stress. It just makes you feel better for a short time. Gabor Mate, my favorite author, spent 9 years in Eastern Vancouver, volunteered, was the only primary care provider there for all the worst addicts in Vancouver. And he discovered that addiction was a way to manage the stress, not the cause. And he even discovered his own addiction to classical music CDs, how many he bought but never opened, just so he could get temporary feel better when he bought something, when he went shopping. And everybody thinks that drugs are cocaine and heroin, but caffeine hits the same receptors as cocaine. Look at this Starbucks coffee mug. I must have coffee. Okay, that's an addiction saying. Dunkin' Donuts used to have a paper cup that said must, period, have, period, coffee, period. Mark Hyman, MD, sugar is 8 times more addictive than cocaine. Sugar is a stimulant. People are addicted to carbohydrates, sugar, Starbucks, sweet drinks, because it gives a temporary feel good. It helps manage stress. And you can get a double hit with chocolate, caffeine and sugar. You see, stress depletes the brain dopamine. There are science studies that show this. And here's a picture and diagram of how dopamine works and how food causes dopamine release, making us feel better. So-called comfort foods. When using cocaine, it's a stronger effect, but it's basically releasing more dopamine. You can even buy dopamine over the counter. This was initially used for Parkinson's disease, but you can just buy it now as a supplement. It doesn't work that great long-term, but it does have some effect. These things only work temporarily. They calm down the stress, but they don't really affect the stress, because the stress is the problem, not the drugs. As Russell Brand said in his podcast with Ben Shapiro, drugs and alcohol are not my problem. Reality is my problem. To compare it to the psychological approach or the mind approach, the physical approach is bottom up. It's get us in the reptilian brain using these things I've shown you, plus some more coming up where we're calm, the VVC, and just get us to stay there as much as we can. Breathing techniques came to the Western world in 1975 with Herbert Benson's book, The Relaxation Response, where he started to treat high blood pressure by breathing exercises that he learned in the Tibet mountains. And he was effective with many people. They would get the high blood pressure, breathe and lower their pressure, get the high blood pressure again when they were stressed, and lower it with breathing. And Art Brownstein, MD, my good friend from my internship, published an article on how he got an Air Force pilot flying again. The pilot was grounded because he had high blood pressure. And with yoga and meditative techniques, breathing techniques, the blood pressure came down without medication and the pilot got back flying again. What about meditation? For many, it's a taste of a stress-free life. If you slow your breathing down, you will temporarily calm everything down. But it's an outside-in approach. It doesn't fix the problem inside, so you still can get stressed out. It's not much different from taking a drug, and probably takes longer, but it probably is safer too. You see, breathing is the only bodily function that is both controllable and automatic. You can slow your breathing down. You can't just go, I'm going to slow my heart rate down. Although some yogic experts say that they can do that, and I think that's been proven that they can, but that takes years of training. But anybody can slow their breathing down. And in his book called Breath by James Nestor, fabulous book, he goes through all the science and all the stuff that's going on with breathing less. That if you can breathe less, you'll lessen the stress. He recommends get down to about 4 breaths a minute, and that you just train yourself by holding your breath even when it hurts. Patrick McCowan is one of the people that James Nestor talks about in the book Breath. This guy has a business with 150 employees. He's from Ireland, but he travels internationally. Big companies hire him because they have employees who can't focus and can't be productive. And he goes around and tells them how to be productive by telling them to breathe less. Just get your breathing rate down to 4 times a minute by doing the breathing exercise that I show you, and you'll be more productive at work. He's got a business, international, 150 employees, just teaching people how to slow their breathing down, lower the stress, focus better. Wim Hof, famous guy, the Iceman. He gets into ice to get into his lower brain, but he admits he still gets stressed out. In the middle of the night, if he's stressed out, thoughts, feeling, then he goes to his breathing technique for stress, which in his book is just sit still for a minute. And he says, take a deep breath in and hum on the way out. Anybody that's taken scuba knows that's how you can safely rise to the surface faster. If you run out of air, just hum on your way up so your lungs don't get injured. You can go to SEAL Fit, a company who contracts with the federal government to train Navy SEALs how to endure better. They teach how to slow your breathing down. The quote from that video that I wrote down, be in more control of our body and our mind, our physiology and our psychology, physical and mental, managing stress. Here is Wim Hof doing his Iceman technique. This is a little bit different. This is called hormetic stress. It is one way to manage stress, and it does get people out of the prefrontal cortex and into the reptilian brain. So it's worth mentioning. But most of what he does with the ice and his breathing technique that goes along with it is for athletic performance. It might be a method that helps you manage stress, but it is like other ways to manage stress. The stress still could go back in night. And Wim Hof even admits that he gets stressed out, that he's got a turtle, a dog, 6 kids, a wife, and he's got to feed them and provide for them. So he sometimes still will get stressed out. And then he does his stress breathing, calms down, and goes back to sleep. That's on the Russell Brand podcast if you want to watch that. Music is a big go-to for people. Music will get us out of the prefrontal cortex and calm us down temporarily. The veterans that I worked with at the VA hospital, who I saw as patients, they really wanted to get back to physical exercise because it helped them with their PTSD. It does release endorphins and calm people down when they're stressed. And lastly, yoga. I did 3 years of yoga, more for stretching. I didn't buy into all the other stuff. I did notice that breathing is part of it, and the breathing did help with the stress if I had trouble getting to sleep at night. Wim Hof, in one of the videos that he did, says that it's just physiology. Okay, what he does, his breathing technique, going in cold, it just affects us physically. He doesn't believe that it's a spiritual change or a psychological change, that it's just a physical change. So he admits that this temporarily manages, that it's not a cure. Here's his quote. Of course I have stress. I have 6 children, a wife, a dog, and a turtle to feed. The physical management of stress is up and down. It can be kind of a yo-yo life. I get stressed, I breathe to relax. I get stressed, I breathe to relax. Or I do my breathing exercises in the morning, and that helps me for a while until I get stressed, until I get that anger and fear again, until there's a trigger, which is a threat, a thought. So managing stress, physical approach is control. Ultimately, it's not resolution. It's not overcoming stress. It really is a fight or flight behavior. If you look at it closely, all these things, physical exercise, hormetic stress, getting in the ice, slowing down your breathing, it's a fight or flight behavior. It's not the answer to stress. I wanted to add this, that the world has 4 basic lies for how to feel better, how to overcome stress. First, success. Second, recognition. Third, power. Fourth, comfort. This is biblical in Luke 6, starts at verse 20. I love the quote from Jim Carrey when he did the documentary answering questions about how he did the movie on Andy Kaufman. Jim Carrey was asked, what does it feel like to have $20 million? It must feel great. And Jim Carrey said, I wish everyone could have $20 million so they could see how empty it is. Money doesn't solve the problem. Money Magazine did a survey years and years ago, and they thought that if they just started around $30,000, well, today's would probably be $60,000. The average family of 4 stressed out needs more money. If they went to $80,000 or $90,000, or eventually, if they got to maybe $150,000, which would be in today's dollars, would be about $300,000, that eventually people would say, that's enough money. I can live on that without stress. And what they found was really interesting, that no matter where they were, $60,000 a year, $100,000, $300,000 a year, everyone said to not be stressed out about money, they needed 20% more. Every level. The people making $60,000 thought they needed about $12,000 more and they wouldn't be stressed. But the people making $300,000 a year said they also needed 20% more or $60,000 more a year, and then they wouldn't feel stressed. So the problem is not how much money a person is making. Recognition. Buzz Aldrin on WebMD. Here's a quote: "Even walking on the moon couldn't stop Buzz Aldrin from feeling low." In fact, the astronaut's sudden fame after the 1969 moon landing led to his divorce, plus problems with alcohol and depression. So the high doesn't come from reaching success. Jim Carrey said that, and Buzz Aldrin proves that. The high comes from the lie, the thought in the head that someday I'll have success and then I'll be okay. Or the lie that the reason I'm not feeling well is because I don't have enough money, so I need to work harder. That's what gets people going after success. Success itself is empty. Recognition is empty. So power. Abraham Lincoln quote, "Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power." People think that power is going to be the answer for their stress, but they keep wanting more and more and more. Look at the world today. These people that have all this power, all this money, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, on and on. They just want more control, more power, because the control behavior, the power, doesn't give long-term relief of stress. It's just a fight or flight behavior. And lastly, comfort foods, on and on, temporary. It doesn't solve the problem. Okay, let's summarize the physical approach. Remember, we're following the whole health approach, which is what the world is into now. Mind, body, and spirit. This is the bodily or physical approach. There is a stress cascade. According to Dr. Bessel van der Kolk in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, it starts with a threat. And if there is inadequate social support, then there is a stress reaction, which is anger or fear. I believe he said with the monkey slide, terror or rage. Then behavior follows the stress: fight or flight, control or avoid. And if there's no way out, then the collapse. And the collapse is classic PTSD, and I think depression too. Remember from our physical description that most, if not all, diseases are stress related through the vagus nerve. Managing stress can include revisiting the trauma to get out of the DVC and into the limbic system so you feel the stress, or relaxation techniques when you do feel the stress, which is a bottom-up approach trying to stay in the reptilian brain by various techniques, including breathing, medications, or tranquilizers and beta blockers to calm down the limbic system, or antidepressants. Looking to the physical world for a temporary feel-good solution, whether it's breathing, sugar, caffeine, or cocaine. It treats the symptoms, not the cause. The stress remains. All right, let's move on to the psychological or the mind, body, spirit, and we'll go to mind now. In the military during combat, there are soldiers that go in just to manage stress. If someone freezes or they try to run away from the stress of combat, then the soldiers need help. And now they have combat stress control units. They have people going in just to talk them down off the ledge. This is a top-down approach. Thought, feeling, behavior is the model that I presented, and stress starts with the thought. So instead of starting from the bottom, getting into the reptilian brain, and thus calming down the limbic system, the stress, the psychological approach is start at the top, start at the thoughts, calm down the top of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, and then that'll calm down the middle brain. Either way, top down or bottom up, the approach is trying to calm down the middle brain, the limbic system, the mammalian brain. From a psychological point of view, they say that the thoughts are your thoughts and that you can control your thoughts. But aren't we back to control behavior? Think about this as we go through it. Is this really overcoming the stress, or is it just a control behavior like any other control behavior to try and control the stress rather than overcome it? The psychologists say that childhood trauma is the source of stress. Okay, well, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. The psychiatrists also say that it follows trauma, although the psychiatrists usually say for the veterans that the trauma is when they were in combat, and the psychologists often will take the veteran back further. They say that repressed feelings, anger, or fear can lead to the dysfunctional behavior. That's part of the model: thought, feeling, behavior, that the dysfunctional behavior comes from the controlling or avoiding the stress. Well, this is closer to the thought, feeling, behavior model, that there are self-protective ways of living, trying to manage stress, keeping a lid on the insecurity, fear and doubt, anxiety and worry, and that's what they try and tackle. The bullying, the rescuing, which is control, to try and punish or fix. These are overachieving, criticizing caffeine drinkers. They're just trying to control their world so that they won't feel the stress. The avoidance behaviors, the victims, the escape artists, they complain, they feel stuck. They always have an excuse why they don't do the right thing. They get depression, substance use. They're underachieving, sometimes easygoing beer drinkers when they have their beer. The psychological approach, like the psychiatric approach, says revisit the trauma, unearth the repressed memories in order to uncover the repressed feelings. They have things like inner child work, which can get someone out of the DVC into their limbic brain, into the emotional center. So they actually feel the stress, feel the emotion, and then they can do something about it. That's their goal. Understanding where the stress came from, and then open and honest communication about the stress, and then learning to manage the stress. Maybe going back to your psychologist every once a month or even once a week at over $100 a visit. Joan Borisenko, all the way back in 1987, said that there was a mind-body connection. She advocates changing the mind in order to cure the body. That the body's symptoms of fast heart rate, high blood pressure, irritable bowel syndrome are caused by problems in the mind. The psychological approach is top down. Here's the prefrontal cortex. If we change the thoughts, then we can change the limbic system. The amygdala is the fear part of the limbic system, as opposed to the bottom up, which is getting the reptilian brain by just breathing exercises. The psychological approach has been termed cognitive behavioral therapy. Change the way you think, cognitive, and that will change the way you behave, cognitive to behavioral. And that was started by Byron Katie, who was very depressed and overcame her depression, in her words, by thinking differently. She found that if she thought differently, things would change. She discovered that when she believed her thoughts, she suffered. But when she didn't believe them, she didn't suffer. So she would take the thoughts and turn them around, change the thought to something opposite. She wrote a book called Loving What Is, and said that all suffering is caused by believing stressful thoughts. Well, she says believing our stressful thoughts. The thoughts are ours, according to the psychological approach. And this is what leads to suffering, and that we don't need to suffer, according to her. Through self-inquiry, she describes how a different, less-known capacity of the mind can end this suffering. So get to know yourself, get to know the thoughts, and change them. The thoughts are questioned. The 4 questions are, is the thought true? Can you absolutely know that it's true? And how do you react? What happens when you believe a thought? Who would you be without the thought? Trying to separate yourself from your thought. And then the next step of the work is turnaround. Change the thought. There is psychological manipulation of people. Okay, this slide should be in the control part. Another aspect of control is psychological manipulation of people. David Charalambos, in a podcast on Rumble, if you just knew the truth about signing a petition or buying a cup of coffee, signing the petition is getting you to do something very different from what you think. They're really trying to control behavior, to get you to think that because you signed a petition, that you're actually going to be causing change, when the people that want you to do the opposite of the thing that you're petitioning are actually getting you to sign a petition, because then they know you won't go to your congressman. In the Veterans Affairs News, they recently completed a deep study of how to treat those with PTSD. And they talked about 2 things. One, the cognitive processing on the right is just the cognitive behavioral therapy from Byron Katie. But the other one is called prolonged exposure, which uses the technique of repeatedly telling one story in vivid detail until the feelings decreased, trying to get you to numb down. Just tell the story of the traumatic experience in combat, and tell it again and again until it doesn't bother you much anymore. It doesn't overcome the stress, but you don't have the feelings anymore, because the feelings do seem to go away. And the stress is the feeling. Okay, let's summarize the psychological approach, or the mind approach. It's not a threat like the physical approach. It is a thought about the threat. So there's a difference. Psychological approach says it's the thoughts that lead to the emotional reaction or the stress. The mind approach starts with the premise that the thoughts are your thoughts and that you can change your thoughts. In AA, they say it's the first drink, but in Al-Anon, they say it's the first think. The Al-Anon people know that the thoughts are the problem. For most people with stress, the psychological approach, like the psychiatric approach, is about managing, not overcoming the stress. Control behavior, in my opinion. If you try and change your own thoughts, you're trying to control the problem. You're really not overcoming the stress. the source of the stress, as I'll explain in Talk 4, is not what the psychologists have told us. For most people with stress, the psychological approach, like the psychiatric, is about managing, not overcoming stress. Okay, how about the success rate? 88% of the veterans at Bay Pines fail to overcome stress after trying the psychiatric and psychological approaches. Okay, so if this psychological approach, change your thoughts, really overcame stress, it would be a better success rate than 12% of people. Those that want to go further are referred to the chaplain service. That was from an interview with the chief of the chaplain service, who's now retired. I had lunch with him. He told me that. Okay, some people think psychology is money down the drain. It doesn't help overcome stress. It can help understand stress, what stress is, understand the thought, feeling, behavior model. Just trying to change your thoughts and then being reinforced every visit. You know, how many visits do you have to go? They want you to keep coming back and spend your $150 a visit just to make you feel better, but you still have the stress, or you wouldn't keep coming back. And service animals are cheaper. Let's move on to religion. What do I mean by religion? This is Sisyphus in the Greek myth, rolling the stone up. It's his punishment for eternity. He rolls the stone to the top, and then the stone rolls back, and he's got to roll it back up the hill again, kind of like a hamster wheel. And he's got to be on the hamster wheel for the rest of eternity. What I mean by religion is if you do what the religious leader tells you to do, then you go to heaven. You return to God. You get peace when you die. That's what I mean by religion. Human effort. If I roll the ball up the hill, then everything will be great. But then it rolls back down. If I go to church, if I read the Bible, if I say my prayers, if I do good, if I try harder next time, then I'll have more peace, more and more and more peace. Gradually, but I have to keep going back to church. I have to keep praying. I have to keep reading the Bible, on and on. I have to do what they say. Religious teachings. As long as I'm in this body, I will sin. We'll find out in Talk 5 that that's not true. It doesn't have to be true. They teach that the sin is the behavior, not the stress, not the anger. And as we'll find out from the source of stress in Talk 4, the sin is not the behavior. The sin is not the sex, the cheating on the spouse, the alcohol. The sin is the anger. Religious leaders teach that the anger can be righteous, that it's okay to be angry. Nothing could be further from the truth, as we'll learn in an upcoming talk. They'll say that it's normal to be afraid. You have to be afraid, or else how could you avoid a threat? What if somebody broke into your house or a car was coming and it was about to hit you? And I know from my experience that I behave a lot better when there's a threat, when I'm not afraid. I've run behind people who were trying to steal from cars. I ran behind their truck. There were 5 of them. And it was 4:30 in the morning. It was dark, and they could have easily jumped out. They had 2 guns, in fact, I learned later. But I ran after them. I got the plate. I didn't feel any fear the whole time. They got caught by the police when I called 911. And I should have been very afraid of that if I'm afraid of anything. That was real danger. But I had no fear, and I responded, I think, appropriately. They had been stealing from our neighborhood for years. So this human effort, roll the ball up the hill again, stay on the hamster wheel. I have to pray. I have to read the Bible. I have to go to church. I have to do the right thing. I have to try harder every day to do those things. Jesus taught against human effort. Okay, I'll give you one quick Bible verse, Matthew 7:11, part of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus said, if you then being evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give you good things to those who ask him? And if you look at the Greek, the word evil is in the Greek dictionary, the Strong's Concordance, Strong number 4190. If we look at that word, it's the Greek word poneros, which comes from poneo, to toil, toilsome, work harder. You who think that you can solve all your problems by working harder, know how to give good things to your children, how much more will your Heavenly Father, who knows that's not true, will give you good things? So the human approach is to work harder, and that's not what is taught by Christ. Jesse Lee Peterson has many wise sayings and has overcome stress, and he says, of myself I can do nothing, and of myself I know nothing. The human effort amounts to nothing. Let's summarize Talk 3. Stress, a better understanding, the world's way to manage stress, the physical, the psychological, and the religious approaches to stress. They are temporary relief, up and down. They lead to a yo-yo existence. It's not spiritual change. I don't care if you do meditation or yoga for 10 hours a day. You won't know how to deal with life. You won't be able to see clearly until you overcome the stress. Anger blinds. And if somebody wants your money and promises to help you with stress, what they're offering is managing it, not overcoming it. Temporarily manage the stress, not overcoming. Upcoming is Talk 4, the source of stress, the real source of stress. It's not what most people think. Join me again on Talk 4 whenever I get to it. But for now, chew on this, go through it again if you need to. But just realize what stress is, the problems it leads to, and how trying to manage it doesn't really overcome it. It's kind of fake and temporary. And the real answer to stress, Talk 5, is upcoming. Thanks for listening, and I hope it helps you.